Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. Have you ever thought about how one wrong decision or a simple, innocent action can lead to a tragedy? Picture a couple deciding to go kayaking on one of the riskiest days of the year. What started as a fun adventure ended in a way so shocking, it's hard to comprehend. Where do we draw the line between an honest mistake and a fateful error? How can one small action or word change everything? By the end of the story, you might find yourself questioning every detail. Angelica's story is a chilling example of how life can change in an instant. The Hudson Valley, with its breathtaking scenery and swift rivers, is a magnet for outdoor enthusiasts. Kayaking is especially popular among thrill seekers, but the river is unforgiving. Even experienced athletes can make mistakes. Angelica Grawald and Vincent Viafer shared a love for the water, seeing it as a source of freedom and connection. On April 19, 2015, they set out on the Hudson River, excited for another adventure. The day began with promise, but the rising winds and rough waves were warning signs. Their goal was a small island with a castle steeped in Scottish-inspired mystery, a place that always captivated them. After a day exploring, evening fell and the situation grew dire. The waves were growing stronger, and the icy waters signaled danger. Staying on the island overnight without proper gear wasn't an option, so they decided to head back. As they paddled against the growing chaos, Vincent's kayak started taking on water. Without a life jacket and submerged in the freezing river, he was in critical danger. Angelica, in a panic, called emergency services, explaining through tears that she couldn't reach him because of the powerful waves pulling him further away. The dispatcher struggled to locate them, losing precious time. As rescuers scrambled to reach the scene, Vincent disappeared beneath the surface. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The dark, choppy waters showed no sign of Vincent, and the evening sky only deepened the despair. This tragic series of events is a haunting reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. Let's learn more about Angelica. At 35, she was an ambitious woman pursuing a career in photography, a passion she envisioned as her future. Born Angelica Lipska, in Latvia, she longed for a better life beyond her homeland. After 2 marriages and divorces, her dream remained the same: to settle in the U.S., secure a work visa, and build a career. Her break came when she got a job as a nanny and moved to the States. Life took a dramatic turn when she met Vincent. Vincent, 46, was a successful construction professional who had also been through 2 divorces. Despite their age difference, their relationship blossomed quickly. Vincent was known for his generosity, hosting parties and enjoying a vibrant social life. It was at one of these gatherings that he met Angelica. Just weeks later, she moved into his home in Poughkeepsie, New York. Their relationship escalated rapidly, with talks of marriage and children becoming common. But under the surface, cracks were beginning to show. On April 18, 2015, just a day before the tragedy, the couple attended a party. While Vincent was lively and engaging with his friends, Angelica left early, citing that she wasn't feeling well. She seemed distant, interacting minimally and avoiding attention. Vincent's friends noticed a visible tension between the two, which led to a small but noticeable argument. Nothing major happened that night, and they went their separate ways until the next morning. The following day, Vincent proposed a kayaking trip, hoping it would help them reconnect and mend their strained bond. Despite the chilly weather and increasing wind, Angelica agreed. They planned to visit Bannerman's Castle, a historic ruin on an island in the middle of the Hudson River, where Angelica hoped to capture stunning photos. She even brought elegant outfits for a photo session, eager to make the most of the day. By noon, the couple was ready to set off, unaware of the tragic turn their day would soon take. At the water's edge, Angelica and Vincent prepared for what they thought would be another exciting adventure. The wind howled, growing stronger by the minute, and massive waves began to rise. The biting cold made every movement feel heavy. Angelica noticed the worsening weather, but Vincent's love for adrenaline and his stubborn determination kept them moving forward. Before they launched, Vincent said something Angelica would never forget: "This will be the adventure of your life." Those words would take on a haunting significance just hours later. The journey to Bannerman's castle went smoothly at first. Angelica later told the police that they had shared a couple of beers before setting off, just to set the mood, but were careful to stay sober for the paddle back. Yet, despite their precautions, the return trip turned into a nightmare. The wind and waves intensified, and Vincent began to lag behind. He shouted that his kayak was taking on water. Angelica turned back and saw his kayak sinking. She tried to paddle toward him, but the powerful currents pulled her toward the shore. By the time she reached land, she frantically called emergency services, but Vincent had already vanished into the icy waters of the Hudson River. The evening of April 19, 2015, marked the start of a desperate search. Rescue teams worked through the night and into the next day. Divers plunged into the murky water, sonar-equipped boats combed the river, and helicopters scanned the area. Despite their tireless efforts, Vincent was nowhere to be found. His family and friends were devastated, clinging to the faint hope that he might have survived, though the odds were slim in such freezing water and against the strong currents. Amid the grief and panic, Angelica's behavior stood out. Unlike Vincent's loved ones, who were consumed with worry, she appeared unusually calm. She even continued to update her social media, posting photos and videos, as if nothing had happened. This deeply upset Vincent's family, who found her actions not only inappropriate but also suspicious. Angelica claimed she was holding on to hope, waiting for her fiancé to return, but her demeanor only widened the gap between her and the grieving relatives. 10 days after Vincent's disappearance, Angelica was called back to the police station for further questioning. The reason? A seemingly offhand comment she had made during her initial conversation with detectives, one that would raise even more questions about her role in the tragic events. Angelica made a startling admission during questioning. She mentioned that she might have accidentally removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak before they started paddling back. This small but critical detail changed everything, shifting the investigation from a tragic accident to something potentially sinister. Suddenly, investigators were asking more questions, and the idea of Vincent's death being purely accidental began to seem less plausible. Angelica also mentioned that Vincent's paddle had a broken locking ring, making it difficult to row properly. This, combined with the missing drain plug, raised alarms for investigators. Could these issues have been deliberate? The possibility of foul play was now on the table, but the big question remained: why? To dig deeper, detectives turned to people who knew Angelica and Vincent. One key interview was with Angelica's ex-boyfriend, Michael Coven, who had lived with her years earlier. Michael was shocked to hear about the suspicions surrounding Angelica, but admitted that her calm demeanor sometimes masked a darker side. He described how Angelica could become confrontational during arguments, particularly when drinking a side of her Vincent reportedly tolerated quietly. More revelations came from Vincent himself. Just weeks before the tragedy, he confided in a friend that he was having second thoughts about marrying Angelica. He described her as manipulative and aggressive, particularly during moments of conflict. This information painted a picture of a relationship that was far from perfect. When detectives questioned Angelica further, she admitted there were conflicts in their relationship but insisted they were personal and unrelated to Vincent's death. However, her vague and ambiguous answers only heightened suspicions. Slowly, the narrative was shifting. Vincent's death seemed less like an accident and more like a deliberate act. The turning point came when investigators uncovered Angelica's potential financial motive. She was the primary beneficiary of Vincent's $500,000 life insurance policy, a sum that could solve her financial troubles and give her a fresh start. At the time of the tragedy, Angelica was unemployed, and this money represented a life-changing opportunity. This discovery transformed Angelica from a grieving fiancé to the prime suspect. Despite the growing evidence against her, she continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining that Vincent's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. The prosecution charged Angelica with second-degree criminal wrongdoing, leading to her arrest and a bail set at $9 million, a sum far beyond her means. Given her foreign nationality, investigators feared she might flee, so Angelica remained in custody as she awaited trial. Her defense team argued that her statements during the grueling 11-hour interrogation were not admissible as solid evidence. Angelica's attorney emphasized that Vincent's body had not yet been recovered, making it impossible to confirm any foul play or intentional wrongdoing. According to the defense, Vincent's death was a tragic accident. They suggested the kayak likely capsized due to a wave, and the drain plug might have come loose as a consequence, not as a cause. To support their claims, the defense conducted an experiment on the Hudson River. A man with a similar build to Vincent sat in an identical kayak model. The test revealed that even under calm conditions, the kayak sat very low in the water just a few inches above the surface. The demonstration showed how large waves could have easily flooded the vessel, even without the drain plug issue. Adding to their case, the defense pointed out that Vincent had consumed alcohol before the trip, which could have impaired his coordination and reaction time. This, combined with the unstable kayak and rough conditions, might have led to the accident. With a flooded kayak, questionable confessions, and conflicting evidence, the case sparked heated debate. The investigation focused heavily on the drain plug, a tiny opening no larger than a fingertip. It was hard to believe such a small detail could have caused the kayak to sink. The drain plug on Vincent's kayak was located on top, making it unlikely that it could have allowed enough water to sink the vessel quickly. In response, the defense insisted on further testing. Using the same kayak model, a man of Vincent's size, and conditions that mirrored the fateful day, they conducted another simulation. The results were telling. Even with the drain plug removed, the kayak did not fill with water rapidly. The small hole allowed only a slow trickle of water, not nearly enough to capsize the vessel in a short period. These findings added significant doubts to the prosecution's theory. Without a recovered body or clear forensic evidence, the case against Angelica was increasingly built on circumstantial evidence and speculation. The defense's experiments revealed that even without the drain plug, Vincent's kayak could have easily made the 1-mile journey back to shore. This undermined the prosecution's claim that the missing plug alone caused the tragedy. When the theory about the plug fell apart, the prosecution shifted their focus to the paddle. Angelica had stated that Vincent's paddle was damaged, missing a locking ring. Investigators suggested that this might have hindered his ability to control the kayak. However, the defense countered this claim with another demonstration. They showed that the absence of the locking ring did not impact the paddle's functionality. It remained sturdy, effective, and fully operational. Despite this, the prosecution leaned heavily on Angelica's own admissions during her interrogation. She had admitted to touching both Vincent's paddle and the kayak's drain plug, which became central to the case against her. For investigators, these admissions seemed to support the idea of a premeditated crime. Even small details like touching the paddle or brushing against the plug were framed as deliberate actions. But Angelica's defense team argued that her words had been taken out of context, pointing to the intense psychological pressure she had endured during her 11-hour interrogation. To bolster their case, the defense brought in an expert on false confessions who reviewed the entire recorded questioning session. The expert argued that the police used techniques designed to elicit a confession through coercion. These included leading questions, the classic good cop, bad cop approach, and denying Angelica time to process what was happening. They also pressured her to repeat phrases that supported their narrative. During the interrogation, Angelica frequently appeared confused, her answers growing increasingly vague and her emotions unstable. The expert emphasized that she was in a state of shock and her statements should have been viewed with caution. One particular phrase became a focal point for the prosecution. Angelica had fleetingly mentioned that she had once thought about being free from her relationship with Vincent. Detectives interpreted this as a confession of intent to harm him. The defense, however, argued that the remark referred to the general strain in their relationship and was unrelated to the events of that day. The false confessions expert noted that at no point did Angelica use words like crime or death in relation to this statement. The police, however, chose to frame her vague comment as a direct admission of guilt, further fueling suspicions. The defense maintained that Angelica's admissions during the interrogation were not a reflection of the truth, but rather the result of manipulation by the investigators. Once the detectives heard statements they could use against her, they ignored her subsequent clarifications. The defense argued that Vincent's kayak had long-standing issues, including a faulty drain plug that had been a problem for months. Angelica claimed they had kayaked several times without the plug, and it had never caused significant trouble. According to the defense, the true cause of the tragedy was the dangerous weather conditions that day, not any intentional actions. However, the prosecution insisted on their theory: a woman tired of her relationship, seeking financial gain, staging an accident to collect insurance money, and starting anew. Angelica's interrogation became a grueling ordeal. She lost track of time and felt trapped, cornered by the relentless questioning. Initially, she tried to stand firm, but the detectives kept circling back to the issue of the drain plug, gradually wearing her down. Her account of the plug's presence or absence became inconsistent, a confusion that the investigators capitalized on. The turning point came when Angelica, emotionally and physically drained, asked to leave so she could feed her cat at home. Tears welled up in her eyes, a moment of vulnerability that the detectives seized. They intensified their questioning, firing a series of leading inquiries designed to elicit incriminating responses. Despite her emotional state, Angelica never directly confessed to any crime. Still, the police refused to back off, interpreting her unclear answers as signs of guilt. An expert who later analyzed the interrogation footage noted that Angelica appeared overwhelmed, exhausted, and unable to think clearly. Her inconsistent responses were, in their view, typical of someone experiencing emotional and mental fatigue, not of someone admitting to wrongdoing. The expert explained that Angelica's primary motivation during the questioning was to bring the ordeal to an end, leading her to provide vague or muddled answers. Her unclear statements became the cornerstone of the prosecution's narrative, even though they were arguably the product of her desperation to escape the relentless interrogation. Vincent's disappearance left his family and friends in emotional turmoil, their grief compounded by uncertainty. Nearly a month later, on May 23, 2015, a boater found Vincent's body in the Hudson River near Bannerman's Island, where he and Angelica had gone that fateful day. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death as drowning, with no evidence of foul play or struggle. Vincent's blood showed traces of alcohol, though not enough to significantly impair him, suggesting the harsh weather and frigid water were the primary factors in his death. Vincent's kayak was also recovered, missing the drain plug and with a paddle lacking its locking ring. The defense maintained that these details were minor and insufficient to explain the tragedy. According to them, the real culprits were the extreme conditions that day: icy water, strong winds, the lack of a life jacket, and Vincent's decision to venture out despite these risks. The prosecution, however, focused on Angelica's inconsistent statements, using them to build their case. They argued that Angelica had intentionally sabotaged the kayak, creating a scenario where Vincent had little chance of survival. Their theory painted her as a calculating woman, staging an accident for personal gain. Angelica's lawyer countered this by emphasizing Vincent's own choices. He had willingly gone kayaking under dangerous conditions, without proper safety gear, and while slightly under the influence of alcohol. These actions, the defense argued, pointed to his own recklessness rather than any malicious intent on Angelica's part. Despite these arguments, Angelica's behavior after Vincent's disappearance remained a sticking point for the prosecution. Her social media posts and calm demeanor were portrayed as suspicious, even though her defense claimed they reflected her unique way of coping with the tragedy. Angelica continued to assert her innocence, maintaining that the events of that day were nothing more than a heartbreaking accident. But as the legal battle unfolded, her statements, the missing drain plug, and the damaged paddle remained central to a case that divided public opinion and kept the spotlight on the mysterious circumstances of Vincent's death. The case took an unexpected turn when the prosecution decided to reevaluate its strategy. They realized that proving Angelica had intentionally caused Vincent's death would be nearly impossible to convince a jury. The theories surrounding the removed drain plug, or a broken paddle, were considered too circumstantial and speculative to establish intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, the defense's arguments and expert testimonies significantly undermined the foundation of the prosecution's case. It became clear that the tragedy could have been the result of a combination of adverse weather conditions, faulty equipment, and poor judgment on Vincent's part, particularly his decision to kayak without a life jacket in dangerous conditions. Faced with these challenges, the prosecution opted to offer Angelica a plea deal if she admitted guilt to involuntary manslaughter. She would serve a reduced sentence of 4 years in prison, a far cry from the life sentence initially sought. Angelica accepted the deal, seeing it as a way to avoid the uncertainty of a trial that could have ended with a harsher punishment. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, because she had already spent significant time in custody while awaiting trial and during the court proceedings, her actual time left to serve was minimal. In December 2017, after serving 32 months, Angelica was released on parole. For Vincent's family, this outcome felt like an insult to their loss. They remained vocal about their dissatisfaction, believing that Angelica had orchestrated the events leading to Vincent's death. They viewed the plea deal as a failure of the justice system, allowing someone they deemed guilty to walk free after serving what they considered an inadequate sentence. Angelica's post-release struggles. After her release, Angelica faced immense challenges. Public opinion in the U.S. was largely against her, and Vincent's family's public statements painted her in a negative light. Her guilty plea also barred her from claiming Vincent's $500,000 life insurance policy, which had been cited as a potential motive for the alleged crime. Furthermore, her status as a foreign national meant she was at risk of deportation. 16 months after her release, Angelica was forced to return to her home country. Back in her homeland, she attempted to rebuild her life. She enrolled in university, secured a job, and worked to move forward, leaving the traumatic events behind. Despite these efforts, the case continued to haunt her. In interviews, she maintained her innocence, insisting that Vincent's death was a tragic accident caused by circumstances beyond her control. The conclusion of the legal proceedings did little to bring closure. Vincent's family remained adamant in their belief that Angelica was responsible for his death, unable to reconcile her actions before and after the tragedy with her claims of innocence. They were especially critical of her demeanor in the immediate aftermath of Vincent's disappearance, including her calm behavior and social media activity, which they found inappropriate and suspicious. On the other hand, Angelica defended her actions, claiming she was in shock and trying to maintain hope. She described her time in custody as harrowing and insisted that the confession she gave during the 11-hour interrogation was coerced and misunderstood. She continued to assert that only she and God knew the truth, and she expressed regret over the tragedy without admitting to any deliberate wrongdoing. The case remained a topic of debate, with many questioning whether justice had been served. While the legal proceedings had concluded, the mystery of what truly happened on the Hudson River persisted. The tragedy served as a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of nature, the consequences of poor judgment, and the devastating impact of unresolved questions surrounding sudden loss. Even after returning to her home country, Angelica's life was forever altered. She became a polarizing figure, with some sympathizing with her plight and others believing she had escaped true accountability. For Vincent's family and friends, the pain of his loss lingered, compounded by their frustration with the justice system and their enduring suspicions about Angelica's role in his death. Story 2. No case doesn't always hold true. This principle, rooted in English law, gained fame after the miracle of Campton. But in our story, there's nobody yet there's still a case. On a November morning in 2011, Galina Kinaya returned to her rented apartment on Yubavika Street in Vladivostok and vanished without a trace. 3 years later, her boyfriend, Victor Cohen, was convicted of her murder. However, no physical evidence of Galina's death was ever presented in court. Her parents remain convinced she is alive and continue to hope for her return. In April 2024, Victor Cohen was released from prison, reigniting public interest in the case. The controversy has split opinions. Some believe Victor served time for a crime that never happened, while others argue the sentence for murder was far too lenient. Let's explore how this high-profile disappearance and alleged murder unfolded, dividing the nation and inspiring search efforts for Galina. Victor Cohen was born on July 9, 1988, in Vladivostok. He adopted the surname Cohen in 2012. His parents divorced when he was young, leaving his mother and grandmother to raise him. In 2005, he graduated from the Far Eastern State University's high school gymnasium. He enrolled in the university's Institute of Mass Communications to study public relations but dropped out after 6 months. In 2007, Alona Katinskaya introduced Victor to her sister, Galina, who was 3.5 years older than him. Galina was born on April 22, 1985, in Rostov-on-Don. At age 13, her family moved to Vladivostok. Galina was known for her striking appearance, unique sense of style, and artistic nature. She studied at an art school and later joined the Faculty of Design at the Far Eastern Federal University. Victor fell deeply in love with Galina, and together they dreamed of pursuing theater careers. Victor dropped out of school, and the couple moved to Moscow to chase their dreams. Unfortunately, Galina failed her entrance exams, and although Victor succeeded, he returned to Vladivostok with her out of solidarity. Back home, they started living together, and Victor received news of his grandfather's death. With the inheritance Victor received after his grandfather's death, he and Galina rented an apartment in the city center, bought themselves cars, and decided to invest the remaining money into a business. They tried several ventures producing car tires, opening a chain of donut shops, and even reselling Churchilla traditional Georgian sweets. However, all these projects quickly failed, leaving the couple disheartened. Over time, the strain of financial failure began to take a toll on their relationship. Their disagreements turned into heated arguments, and at times violence. On one occasion, Galina's friends witnessed Victor lifting her by the neck during a fight. However, Galina wasn't always the victim. She sometimes hit Victor or broke furniture in their rented apartment during arguments. Their relationship deteriorated further. Galina began frequenting nightclubs, while Victor sought attention from other women, both seemingly trying to escape the problems in their lives. On the morning of November 14, 2011, after another night out at the club, Galina returned home in high spirits. However, Victor wasn't there, which made her furious. At 6:43 a.m., she called him, demanding he return immediately. Within 15 minutes, Victor was back at their apartment. A heated argument followed, during which they decided to end their relationship for good. Galina demanded 300,000 rubles in exchange for the car Victor had previously given her. Victor handed over the money, and Galina left the apartment, supposedly for the last time. The following day, Galina's parents grew concerned when they couldn't reach her. Her phone was switched off. Victor also didn't respond to their calls. 2 days later, he contacted Galina's mother, explaining that the two had quarreled. He claimed she had taken a large sum of money and left, saying, "You'll never see me again. Don't look for me. Tell my mom everything is fine with me." Victor added that he had tried calling Galina several times after she left, but her phone remained off. Initially, her sudden disappearance didn't alarm her friends and family, as Galina was known for her impulsive behavior. However, as days passed without any sign of her, their worry grew. Initially, Galina's disappearance didn't raise alarms because she was known for her impulsive nature and had disappeared for days before. However, 3 days later, her father filed a missing person report, prompting law enforcement to begin an official search. Police immediately questioned Victor, as he was the last person to see Galina. During his interrogation, Victor admitted that his relationship with Galina had deteriorated and that he was seeing another woman. He described Galina as volatile and jealous, claiming she had physically attacked him in the past and once poured yogurt on his car in a fit of rage. Victor insisted on his innocence, saying, "I didn't kill Galina. Yes, we quarreled. She packed her belongings, took 300,000 rubles and left. I don't know where she went." Investigators searched the apartment the couple shared, as well as both of their cars, but found no blood or any evidence of foul play. Victor even agreed to take a lie detector test. While his testimony was inconsistent at times, there was no concrete proof linking him to Galina's disappearance. Police also interviewed Galina's friends and neighbors but found no signs of a crime. Adding to the mystery, Galina had never traveled outside of Vladivostok and didn't possess a foreign passport. With no evidence of wrongdoing, the authorities decided not to pursue a criminal case. Victor, meanwhile, moved on with his life. He collected Galina's belongings and returned them to her parents. Shortly afterward, he moved in with his new girlfriend, Tatiana. Their relationship blossomed, and in 2012 they got married. It was during this time that Victor decided to change his last name. Encouraged by Tatiana, who had heard the name in a movie, he adopted the surname Cohen, leaving behind his father's surname, which he had long disliked. For several years, Galina's disappearance faded from public memory. Victor and Tatiana enjoyed a happy marriage, filled with travel and quiet moments together. But everything changed 3 years later, when Galina's disappearance was reclassified as a murder case. For 3 years, Galina remained missing, and her mother, Elena Kadinskaya, didn't initially worry much. Elena believed her daughter's creative and unpredictable nature meant she might have simply left on a whim. This lack of urgency likely contributed to the delay in classifying Galina's disappearance as a criminal case. In June 2014, however, the authorities revisited the case. Based on existing evidence, they reclassified it as a murder investigation under the relevant criminal code. Galina was officially listed as a missing person, and detectives began exploring multiple theories about her disappearance. These ranged from her leaving to work in the modeling industry abroad to the possibility of foul play. As investigators delved into the murder theory, Victor Cohen, Galina's ex-boyfriend, came under scrutiny. They uncovered reports of frequent quarrels between the two, often fueled by Galina's jealousy over Victor's relationships with other women. Additionally, there were claims that Galina had plans to travel to Korea. She had previously worked as a model in China and was rumored to want to continue her career in modeling. However, Victor became the primary suspect because he was the last person to see Galina alive. Discrepancies in Victor's and other witnesses' testimonies further raised suspicions about his potential involvement. On July 23, 2014, Victor was summoned for questioning. During this session, he shocked investigators by confessing to killing Galina. Victor admitted that during an argument on the morning of November 14, 2011, he strangled Galina. He then dismembered her body in the near the Varig factory. There, he built a fire using car tires, burned the body, and scattered the ashes in various locations. Victor displayed an unsettling level of confidence during the interrogation. He spoke casually with investigators, used foul language, and even smiled as he recounted the gruesome details. Sitting comfortably with his feet on the floor, he behaved as though the entire ordeal was a routine conversation. He shared chilling details, including how he had initially planned to boil Galina's body in a steamer, grind the remains with a meat grinder, and flush them down the toilet. However, he abandoned this idea, fearing the sewer system might clog and incriminate him. Victor coldly explained that he killed Galina because she was interfering with his new relationship. This shocking confession left even seasoned detectives stunned by Victor's lack of remorse and the sheer brutality of his actions. Victor described Galina as an unconventional woman who thrived on attention. She frequently went out to nightclubs and had a fiery temper, often causing loud arguments at home. According to Victor, Galina sometimes spoke of wanting the glamorous life of an escort model. However, she refused to accept that such a lifestyle often required providing intimate services. Despite her eccentric behavior, Victor found her charming and interesting until things took a darker turn. From Victor Cohen's interrogation, I was irritated. I was standing near the coffee machine, drinking coffee, and something in me just snapped. That was it. I went home, walked up to her while she was sleeping, said, "I'm sorry," and started choking her. She woke up and tried to fight back, but I strangled her for a long time. Then I left the house and cried. It wasn't fear, it was frustration and loss. I understood what I had done, but as a rational person, I kept my composure. Following the confession, investigators brought Victor to the apartment he shared with Galina in 2011 to conduct an investigative experiment. There, Victor demonstrated how he strangled Galina on a folding sofa. He claimed she had been drunk and asleep, making it easy for him to overpower her. After ensuring she was dead, Victor said he left the apartment, went to his car, and devised a calculated plan to dispose of her body. Victor explained that he had learned about burning bodies using car tires from a documentary about India, where the practice was used in traditional cremation rituals to achieve higher temperatures. He told investigators that disposing of Galina's body was much simpler than he had initially imagined. Late that night, Victor was taken to the vacant lot, where he claimed to have burned Galina's remains. Under pitch darkness, he was asked to pinpoint the exact location. However, according to human rights activists, the chosen location had no traffic or CCTV cameras, raising suspicions about the integrity of the investigation. Key gaps in the case emerged during the investigation. Victor repeatedly pointed out inconsistencies himself. It wasn't clear what tool he used to dismember Galina's body, as an ordinary kitchen knife wouldn't suffice. Questions arose about how he fit her remains into 3 buckets, carried them out in full view, and why no one noticed him leaving with such unusual items. The landlord who rented the apartment to Galina was later brought in for questioning, as investigators tried to piece together the missing details. When investigators questioned the landlords who rented the apartment to Galina and Victor, they revealed that they had lost contact with Victor after learning the police had been there. When they went to check the property, they found the apartment completely empty. No tenants or belongings remained. On the ceiling, they noticed brown splatters they assumed were from coffee or tea, and there were black streaks on the wallpaper, likely from storing car tires. Unknown to Victor, his interrogation had been recorded on video. When he realized he had revealed too much on camera, he retracted his confession. Victor claimed that during his questioning at the investigation unit on Kariva Street, officers had forced him to confess through unauthorized methods. He also alleged they threatened to harm his wife, Tatiana, if he did not comply. Victor stated that the story he told was fabricated under duress by the officers, and that the location of the records. However, questions about his claims of torture arose. CCTV footage from the investigation unit showed that Tatiana Cohen arrived at the building around 6 p.m., but was not allowed inside. She waited outside until 6:20 p.m., at which point Victor was brought in. Tatiana entered the building at 6:30 p.m., and Victor's recorded interrogation began at 6:38 p.m. Critics questioned how torture could occur in just 8 minutes, leading Victor to make up such a detailed and graphic confession. On August 11, 2015, after the first court hearing, Victor Cohen was found guilty of the murder of Galina Kadenskaya. The court sentenced him to 9 years and 10 months of imprisonment in a strict regime penal colony. After Victor's conviction, his wife, Tatiana, became his staunchest supporter and primary defender. Convinced of his innocence, she tirelessly fought to clear his name. The case captured the attention of Vladivostok residents, dividing the public into 2 camps: those who believed Victor was wrongfully convicted and those who saw him as a cold-blooded killer. Supporters even organized rallies in Victor's defense, while his wife remained unwavering in her fight for justice. Even after the devastating news that her husband would spend nearly 10 years in prison, Tatiana remained steadfast in her belief in Victor's innocence. During the court proceedings, a revealing video included in the case files was shown. Victor claimed his confessions were coerced through threats and physical abuse by interrogators, citing hospital records that documented a concussion and ear trauma as evidence. The case gained widespread attention. The idea that a young, charming man with striking brown eyes could coldly strangle, dismember, and burn his girlfriend shocked the public. Many struggled to reconcile these accusations with Victor's charismatic persona and his background. He had even been admitted to the prestigious Moscow Theater Institute but chose not to pursue it. Friends, classmates, and acquaintances universally described Victor as a positive, well-mannered individual. Victor's defense focused on the lack of concrete evidence. Neither the apartment, where the murder allegedly occurred, nor the site, where the body was reportedly burned, yielded any traces of human DNA. Witnesses even claimed to have seen Galina in the city after her disappearance. The case's emotional intensity was further amplified by Galina's mother, Elena Kadenskaya. She genuinely believed her daughter was alive and consistently stated in interviews that Victor was innocent. She held onto the hope that Galina would eventually return and explain her absence. After being convicted, Victor continued to claim that the narrative of murder was entirely fabricated. He pointed out the absence of biological traces at the alleged burning site, as well as inconclusive forensic results from his apartment and car. Galina's parents, surprisingly, supported Victor, remaining convinced that their daughter was still alive. Victor's lawyer, Ivan Mikhaev, also emphasized the lack of objective evidence. Soil samples from the site, where Victor allegedly burned the body, showed no biological remains. Furthermore, critical case materials were reportedly missing, including inspection reports from the apartment and car, lie detector results, and camera footage from 2011. Victor's family and defense team suggested the case had been hastily reclassified as a murder to avoid accountability for an unsolved disappearance. Despite the conviction, questions lingered about the integrity of the investigation, leaving the public divided over Victor's guilt and Galina's fate. Galina Katinskaya was never found, but the case against Victor Cohen proceeded despite the absence of a body. Victor, disagreeing with the verdict, filed an appeal, maintaining his innocence and insisting that his confession had been coerced by law enforcement. Tatiana Cohen, Victor's wife at the time, launched a massive campaign in his defense. She appeared on various talk shows, organized rallies, and maintained an active presence on social media, where she raised funds for legal fees while posting what many believe to be fabricated updates. On December 7, 2015, the Court of Appeals overturned Victor's conviction, citing violations of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The case was sent back to the Court of First Instance for retrial. Despite this, on June 21, 2016, the court again found Victor guilty of murdering Galina. He was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months in a strict regime penal colony. Victor's defense team appealed the ruling once more, but on November 28, 2016, the Court of Appeals upheld the sentence and Victor began serving his time. Following the final ruling, Tatiana distanced herself from Victor, withdrew from the campaign, and filed for divorce. It was later revealed that she had entered a new relationship almost immediately after Victor's arrest. This unexpected development led to speculation about her true motives, but Tatiana refused to comment. Despite the lack of a body, the court convicted Victor based on circumstantial evidence, which prosecutors argued was overwhelming. Among the key pieces of evidence was his confession, in which he described a plan to dispose of Galina's body using a meat grinder. Investigators later uncovered corroborating records from November 14, 2011. According to these records, Victor purchased a meat grinder and a pressure cooker from the Dominica store at the Maxim Shopping Center. In 2015, the investigation retrieved receipts and matched them with Victor's phone records. A purchase under the surname Puv matched the exact time of the billing. The store's administrator testified in court, confirming the authenticity of the database and that there had been no tampering. This evidence, combined with Victor's initial confession and his inconsistent testimony, led to his conviction. Though Victor and his defense continued to contest the fairness of the trial, public opinion remained divided, with many questioning the justice of convicting someone in the absence of direct forensic evidence. The court's decision to convict Victor Cohen heavily relied on circumstantial evidence, as the body of Galina Katinskaya was never recovered. Key factors in the verdict included discrepancies in Victor's statements and corroborative details from various sources. Cell phone billings and behavior. Victor's cell phone records from November 14, 2011, showed that he stayed at the apartment from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. This time frame coincided with the alleged dismemberment of Galina's body. Later that night, his phone connected to a tower near the Varig plant, where he reportedly disposed of her remains. Victor had previously claimed that he tried to call Galina after she left, but phone records indicated otherwise. Between 10 a.m. and the evening, he made no attempts to contact her. His last call that day was at 11:51 p.m. to Tatiana, made near the plant. What stood out to investigators in the court was Victor's lack of effort to contact Galina after her disappearance. Unlike her relatives, friends, and even Victor's own mother, who repeatedly tried calling her, Victor made no such attempts. Prosecutors argued that this behavior suggested Victor already knew she would not answer. Purchases and evidence in the apartment. Victor reportedly purchased 3 20-liter plastic buckets with lids on the same day. He bought a meat grinder and pressure cooker. While the receipts for these buckets did not contain a name, investigators linked them to Victor. Questions arose about how Galina's body could have fit into 3 20-liter buckets. Prosecutors argued that Victor meticulously dismembered her in the bathtub to make this possible. Further evidence came from the bathtub itself. According to Victor's confession, he dismembered Galina there, covering the area with foil to prevent blood from leaving traces. He then scrubbed the tub vigorously with a metal brush, damaging the enamel. Later, Victor claimed that the damaged enamel was the result of Galina using harsh cleaning chemicals. Witness testimonies. Witnesses claimed to have seen Galina in a supermarket in Vladivostok and at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow after her disappearance. However, these claims were debunked during the investigation. CCTV footage from the airport revealed no evidence of Galina's presence, and the alleged supermarket sighting was also proven false. One witness, who falsely testified to seeing Galina, was later charged with providing false evidence. Final judgment. The combination of Victor's inconsistent statements, the phone billing records, the detailed confession later recanted, the purchases tied to the timeline of events, and the damage to the apartment's bathtub formed a compelling narrative for the prosecution. While the defense continued to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, and that no physical traces of Galina were ever found, the court upheld its decision. Victor Cohen was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months in a strict regime penal colony. Despite ongoing debate, Victor's conviction remains one of the more controversial cases, as it hinges on circumstantial evidence without the recovery of the victim's body. The mystery surrounding Galina Kotham's disappearance and the subsequent conviction of Victor Cohen has left many unresolved questions. One of the main issues discussed by investigators and journalists is why no physical traces of Galina were found, despite the brutal nature of the crime. The lack of traces. The key question that loomed over the investigation was why, after committing such a gruesome crime, there were no physical traces of Galina's body or DNA in Victor's apartment or cars. The answer became clearer when examining the timeline and the way the crime scene was handled. Delay in police access after Galina's disappearance. Victor made sure that the police couldn't access his apartment for a critical period. He immediately moved in with his wife, Tatiana, and the apartment remained off-limits to the police until December 8th, nearly a month after the murder. Even then, the police didn't use sensitive techniques, such as luminol, which could reveal traces of blood, to investigate the apartment for forensic evidence. By the time they gained access, Victor had had 3 weeks to clean the apartment thoroughly. Car inspection. Similarly, the police didn't inspect Victor's car until December 27th, more than a month after Galina's disappearance. This delay gave him ample time to clean the car and eliminate any traces of her presence. Burning the body. Expert analysis concluded that it was indeed possible to completely burn a body under artisanal conditions, such as using car tires to reach the high temperatures required to burn bones. This process destroyed much of Galina's remains, leaving only small, blackened fragments of bone. Victor claimed he scattered these remains in the woods near the place of the fire, but wild animals may have further scattered them, making it nearly impossible for investigators to recover any physical evidence. For scattering evidence, the fact that no bones or remains were found in the area Victor described was significant. The only way to locate these remnants would have been to sift through a vast area of forest. The sheer scale of the search made it an almost impossible task, further complicating the investigation. Theories and doubts. Victor Cohen's conviction for Galina Kadin, Skyer's murder, remains controversial, as questions linger about her fate. Investigators argue it's nearly impossible for someone to vanish completely in today's world without leaving a trace. Yet, more than 13 years later, no evidence has surfaced of Galina being alive or of her remains being found. Victor never suggested Galina might return, focusing instead on denying his guilt. Unanswered questions. The case lacks definitive evidence, such as DNA or a body, leaving uncertainty about Victor's guilt and what truly happened to Galina. His passive acceptance of his conviction and lack of efforts to prove his innocence have raised doubts. lack of closure. Galena's family continues to search for her, clinging to hope, despite the years gone by. The absence of answers keeps the case alive in the public's mind, with many still skeptical of the official story. Legacy of mystery. The disappearance of Galina Kadinskaya is a reminder of how elusive the truth can be. Victor's behavior, coupled with the unresolved case, ensures the mystery continues to stir emotions and speculation. Story 3. On the evening of October 27, 2002, everything seemed normal. Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce, a well-known socialite and respected member of her community, had spent the day playing tennis with a friend. When it started raining unexpectedly, she headed back to her home in Carmel, an upscale gated community. Her plan was to take a relaxing bath before meeting a massage therapist she had scheduled. But when her husband, Carlos Carrascosa, opened their front door, he was faced with something he could never have imagined. That evening, under unusual and tragic circumstances, Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce, a prominent Argentine socialite and heiress to a multimillion-dollar fortune, lost her life. At first, her death was ruled a domestic accident, and no criminal investigation was conducted. However, the case was full of inconsistencies and suspicious details. The investigation only began when one of the paramedics who responded to the emergency sensed that something wasn't right. He believed he had walked into a crime scene. To make matters worse, the behavior of the people present seemed odd, as if they were trying to hide evidence or cover something up. So who was Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce? Maria Marta, who later became Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce de Carrascosa after marriage, was born on April 24, 1952, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She grew up in a wealthy and noble family, part of Argentina's high society. With access to the best education, she earned a sociology degree and graduated from a prestigious business school, paving the way for a successful career. At just 19 years old, she married Carlos Carrascosa, an Argentine businessman 6 years her senior. The couple remained married for over 30 years until her untimely death in 2002. Although they didn't have children, Maria Marta was more than just a wife and sociologist. She was a prominent socialite and a dedicated philanthropist. In the mid-1990s, she became the vice president of an organization focused on finding missing children, showcasing her passion for helping others. Her life, however, came to a shocking and mysterious end, leaving behind unanswered questions and a case that continues to intrigue people to this day. Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce was admired for excelling in all aspects of her life while remaining kind, approachable, and sociable. Everyone who knew her loved her. Her husband, Carlos Carrascosa, however, had a more questionable reputation, with rumors suggesting he had ties to the criminal world. Although no concrete evidence ever proved these claims, the whispers followed him. A prestigious community for the elite. In the mid-1970s, Maria Marta and Carlos, along with her parents, were among the first investors in Carmel, an exclusive residential complex for the wealthy and famous. Over time, Carmel became a private sanctuary for Argentina's elite. Gaining entry without special permission was nearly impossible, even for law enforcement. This exclusivity would later play a pivotal role in the events surrounding Maria Marta's death. A tragic evening becomes a mystery. When Carlos returned home on the evening of October 27, 2002, he discovered Maria Marta unconscious in the bathroom. At first, her death was reported as an accident of fall that caused her to hit her head on a faucet. But things quickly took a strange turn. The behavior of family and friends that night raised eyebrows. Instead of panic, they displayed an unusual calmness. Their actions seemed almost coordinated, as though they were trying to control the narrative and limit what outsiders might learn about the incident. Doubts began to surface. The first major suspicions arose when an autopsy revealed injuries that didn't align with the explanation of a simple fall. As these inconsistencies came to light, investigators faced mounting pressure. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident transformed into one of the most controversial cases in Argentina's history. Secrets began to surface, and the truths of this high society scandal slowly unraveled. By the late 1990s, Maria Marta had moved to Carmel with her husband, seeking a quieter and more peaceful lifestyle away from bustling Buenos Aires. The gated community spanned 250 acres and featured over 300 plots. It was the perfect place for families and those who enjoyed active living. Carmel offered numerous sports facilities, including fields and courts for soccer, basketball, volleyball, golf, and tennis, as well as swimming pools and other amenities. Within this serene and luxurious setting, no one could have imagined that a tragedy would unfold, one that would grip the nation and leave a trail of unanswered questions. Carmel, the exclusive gated community where Maria Marta lived, was known for its tight security. The area had multiple surveillance cameras, alarms, and security checkpoints with strict rules and 24-hour monitoring. It was home to wealthy, well-known individuals who valued peace and privacy, making violent crime or tragic accidents extremely rare. A typical day takes a dark turn. On Sunday, October 27, 2002, Maria Marta and Carlos spent the day with their friends, the Benitez couple who also lived in Carmel. The warm weather made it perfect for relaxing activities. After lunch, Maria Marta and her close friend, Viviana Benitez, decided to play tennis, while Carlos visited his brother-in-law Guillermo and his wife Irene to watch a soccer game. Maria Marta had scheduled a 7 p.m. massage at home and planned to return in time. Around 5 p.m., a sudden rainstorm forced her and Viviana to stop their tennis game. Maria Marta, riding her bicycle home, arrived soaked and decided to take a warm bath to relax. At 6:45 p.m., Beatriz Michelini, the massage therapist, arrived at one of Carmel's security checkpoints. Entry into the community required prior authorization, so the security team attempted to contact Maria Marta by phone. However, despite repeated calls, no one answered. Concerned, the security team decided to send a guard to check on Maria Marta. Before this could happen, Carlos appeared, confirmed Beatriz's appointment, and entered the community with her. In conflicting accounts, here the story becomes muddled. In one version, the security guard sent to Maria Marta's house was called back after Carlos' arrival. In another, the guard reached the residence but was stopped by Carlos, who assured him everything was fine and that he would take care of the situation. When Carlos arrived at the house, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. He asked Beatriz to wait outside and entered the house alone. What he found inside would change everything. Carlos called out to his wife several times, but there was no response. He instructed the massage therapist to stay outside and headed upstairs. As he approached the bathroom, he noticed steam pouring out of the open door. What he saw inside was horrifying. The room was splattered with blood, and Maria Marta lay face down in a bathtub full of hot water. Carlos quickly turned off the running water, pulled his wife's lifeless body out of the tub, and attempted resuscitation. He shouted for help, and the massage therapist, standing outside, rushed in. Horrified by the scene, she joined him in trying to revive Maria Marta, performing CPR. Instead of calling emergency services, Carlos phoned his brother-in-law, Guillermo, to inform him that Maria Marta had had an accident. His tone was so odd that the family didn't initially grasp the severity of the situation, but Guillermo and his wife Irene decided to head to the house to help. It wasn't until about 10 minutes after discovering Maria Marta's body that Carlos finally called for an ambulance. By that time, Guillermo and Irene had arrived, and Irene, in a panic, called for another medical team and went to seek help from a neighbor, who was a doctor. Unfortunately, the neighbor was also unable to do anything to save Maria Marta. The cleanup begins. Around 7:30 p.m., the first ambulance arrived. Dr. Juan Gabriel Gorn took over resuscitation efforts, using a defibrillator and administering adrenaline, but Maria Marta showed no signs of life. Meanwhile, more relatives and neighbors began arriving at the house. Soon, there were nearly 20 people present, mostly family members and a few neighbors. At 7:45 p.m., a second ambulance arrived with Dr. Santiago Bayasai, who also attempted to revive Maria Marta. As Dr. Bayasai worked on her body, now moved to the hallway, someone from the family began cleaning the scene. The bathtub was drained, and blood stains on the floor, faucet, and walls were wiped away. Shockingly, Dr. Gorn himself assisted with the cleanup, an act that alarmed Dr. Bayasai. He urged everyone to stop and to leave the scene untouched, as it was beginning to look suspicious. It was becoming clear to Dr. Bayasai that this was not a simple accident, but potentially a crime scene. He urged everyone to stop cleaning and avoid tampering with evidence, but the family disagreed, insisting it was a tragic accident. They believed Maria Marta had slipped in the bathroom, hit her head on the faucet, and drowned. Ignoring his warnings, they continued cleaning, claiming that the blood stains and water were too traumatic for her grieving family to see, especially her sisters and mother. The police denied entry. Around 8 p.m., a police car arrived at the Carmel complex. The security guard at the gate assumed the officers were there for the Garcia Belson's home, but per protocol, he needed confirmation before allowing them entry. He called Carlos, who insisted there was no need for police involvement, stating that this was merely an accident. Surprisingly, no one from the family had contacted the police. The patrol car had stopped by chance after noticing 2 ambulances arriving one after another. Without a warrant or evidence of illegal activity, the officers couldn't enter the gated community. After waiting for clearance that never came, they left. Later, security guards reported that Maria Marta's brother had spoken with the officers briefly before they drove away. This fueled rumors that he might have bribed them to stay out of the situation, but these claims were never proven. A strange discovery after Maria Marta was pronounced dead by the medical team. Her family moved her body to and placed her on the bed, as though preparing her for a funeral. They then resumed cleaning the bathroom and hallway. Dr. Bayasai, still present, was alarmed by the family's actions and repeatedly asked them to stop tampering with the scene, but his requests went unheeded. At the scene, Maria Marta's brother showed the strange metallic fragment to Carlos, asking if he recognized it. Carlos shrugged, dismissing it as trash. Without much thought, the fragment, later identified as part of a bullet, was flushed down the toilet, effectively destroying critical evidence. A call for action the following day, October 28th, Dr. Bayasai contacted a police officer he knew, sharing his observations from the Garcia Belson's house. Concerned by the unusual details, the officer wanted to investigate immediately but was asked to respect the grieving family and allow them time to mourn. Still, he passed the information to Prosecutor Diego Molina Pico and the police commissioner, urging a closer investigation. Armed with a warrant, Prosecutor Pico and the commissioner visited the scene. At first, they found nothing overtly suspicious, as Maria Marta's family maintained their claim that her death was an unfortunate accident. But interviews with other witnesses, particularly Dr. Bayasai, painted a different picture. The doctor emphasized that Maria Marta's head injuries seemed unusual and that the bathroom resembled a crime scene. He also reiterated his warnings to the family not to disturb the scene, which they had ignored. A suspicious medical report after hearing conflicting testimonies, Prosecutor Pico requested the official medical report on Maria Marta's death. The report only deepened the mystery. It stated that the 50-year-old woman had died from sudden cardiac arrest with no visible injuries. However, eyewitness accounts spoke of a head wound, pools of blood, and an apparent accident. Adding to the confusion, the report listed Buenos Aires as the place of death, even though Carmel is a separate municipality far from the capital. Carlos, the grieving widower, had signed the document verifying its accuracy. This raised eyebrows, as Carlos himself had mentioned an accident, but now appeared to be officially backing a different narrative. Carlos becomes the prime suspect. With no evidence of a security breach in the highly protected Carmel complex, investigators began to suspect that Maria Marta's death might not have been an accident. The lack of forced entry suggested the perpetrator could have been someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on Carlos, whose behavior and contradictory statements made him the primary focus of the investigation. The case was no longer about a simple tragedy. It was becoming a tangled web of inconsistencies, raising questions about what really happened to Maria Marta that evening. The shocking truth unveiled. Nearly a month after Maria Marta's death, her body was exhumed to clarify the cause of her passing. The results were astonishing. 5 bullet wounds were found in her skull. 4 bullets remained lodged inside, while the 5th had grazed her head, chipping a piece of bone. This revelation raised troubling questions. How had two medical professionals and numerous witnesses failed to distinguish gunshot wounds from injuries caused by a fall? Further evidence included signs of a struggle on Maria Marta's face and hands, as well as traces of blood under her fingernails that did not belong to her. The case was immediately reclassified as a homicide, intensifying the scrutiny on her death. The clue in the plumbing. During an interview with investigators, Maria Marta's brother mentioned the strange metallic fragment he had flushed down the toilet the night of her death. Investigators, knowing the house had been left unoccupied since Carlos moved to an apartment in the city, accessed the plumbing system and retrieved the object. Forensic examination confirmed it was a bullet fragment, matching the ones found in Maria Marta's skull. This discovery, along with discrepancies in the testimonies of family members and errors in official documents, placed the family under suspicion. Carlos becomes the primary suspect. Carlos, Maria Marta's husband, was officially identified as the primary suspect. In early 2003, he was arrested and placed in custody, though he denied any involvement in his wife's death. The mounting evidence, however, painted a troubling picture. Motives and theories. Several theories about the motive for the crime began to emerge. Involvement with criminal activity. One theory suggested that Carlos had ties to a Mexican cartel and was involved in money laundering. It was speculated that Maria Marta might have stumbled upon his illegal activities and, being a law-abiding person, could have threatened to report him. 2. Active participation. Another possibility was that Maria Marta was aware of Carlos' dealings and may have even been involved. However, guilt over these activities might have pushed her toward exposing the truth, making her a liability. 3. Collaboration and cover-up. It was also suggested that Carlos didn't act alone. There were suspicions that others assisted in covering up the crime. The meticulous cleaning of the house, the movement of Maria Marta's body, and the initial barring of law enforcement from entering the gated community all hinted at a coordinated effort to hide evidence. 4. A complex web of secrets. As the investigation continued, more details began to surface, unraveling the intricate and dark layers of this high-profile case. The tragic death of Maria Marta, once believed to be a simple accident, was now exposed as a chilling and carefully concealed crime. The missing safe. During the investigation, Carlos unexpectedly mentioned that a small safe had gone missing from their home on the day of Maria Marta's death. According to him, the safe contained cash, important documents, checkbooks, and valuable jewelry. This revelation, however, came late in the investigation, raising suspicions about its authenticity. Neighbors had previously speculated that the couple kept a large sum of money at home, but it remained unclear whether the safe truly existed or if its disappearance was a fabrication to divert attention. The trial against Carlos began in 2004, with prosecutors accusing him of causing his wife's death. They sought a life sentence, alleging he had the most to gain financially from Maria Marta's demise, including their assets and valuables. In early 2007, Carlos was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, doubts persisted about his guilt, particularly regarding physical evidence, which could form a breakthrough in DNA evidence. After spending 5 years in prison, Carlos' case took a dramatic turn. DNA analysis revealed that none of the blood samples collected from the scene or Maria Marta's body matched Carlos. This critical finding cast significant doubt on the prosecution's case. In 2016, Carlos was fully acquitted and released. The court ruled that while Carlos had attempted to conceal evidence, he was not responsible for his wife's death. The issue with Maria Marta's death certificate remained a puzzling element in the case. Initially, her family signed a pre-prepared death certificate, believing her death to be an accident and not a crime. The process of obtaining a death certificate for a resident of the elite suburban complex proved complicated. Maria Marta's brother first approached a funeral home, but they refused to issue the certificate without a forensic examination. He then sought assistance in a neighboring province, explaining the situation as a domestic accident. By coincidence, the medical examiner assigned to verify the death was on leaving the funeral home to rely on pre-signed forms. These forms required only the addition of specific details, allowing for potential errors or manipulation. The missing safe, the inconsistent testimonies, and the tampering with evidence continued to cloud the case. While Carlos was acquitted, the true circumstances of Maria Marta's death remained unresolved, leaving behind a haunting mystery and a deeply divided public opinion about justice in the high-profile case. A new theory and an unexpected suspect after the charges against Carlos were dropped. A new theory emerged that reshaped the investigation. It was speculated that Maria Marta, having returned home earlier than expected due to the rain, might have surprised an intruder. This narrative lent credibility to the story of the missing safe. According to investigators, Maria Marta likely entered the house without noticing the intruder initially. She went upstairs, turned on the water in the bathtub, and then encountered the armed individual. A brief struggle ensued during which Maria Marta managed to scratch the attacker. In response, the intruder fired 5 shots at her head from close range before fleeing with the safe. Security concerns and a local connection despite the apparent plausibility of the intruder theory. One glaring question remained: how could someone infiltrate the highly secure Carmel complex? With its 24-hour security and multiple checkpoints, it seemed impossible for an outsider to gain entry unnoticed. This led investigators to suspect that the perpetrator might have been someone local, someone who knew the area and its security routines intimately. Enter Nicholas Pacello. Nicholas Pacello, a controversial resident of Carmel, soon became a prime suspect. He was infamous among neighbors for his confrontational behavior and suspicious activities. Inheritance under suspicious circumstances, Pacello inherited a vast fortune after the mysterious death of his father, raising questions about his involvement. Compulsive theft. Despite his wealth, Nicholas was known for a compulsive need to steal, a habit that had reportedly turned into an obsession. Neighborhood reputation. Many neighbors described him as rude, aggressive, and devoid of principles, with some actively avoiding him. Plausible crime scenario. Rumors among the Carmel residents suggested that the Garcia Belson's family kept a significant amount of cash and valuables at home. Given his proximity and access, Nicholas would have been well aware of this. The theory proposed that Pacello, driven by greed, might have entered the house that day intending to steal the safe. Upon encountering Maria Marta, he panicked, leading to the violent altercation that ended in her death. The missing safe and its contents. The contents of the missing safe remained unknown, but the speculation of its existence provided a motive for the crime. Investigators believed it might have contained cash, jewelry, or other important documents that could have attracted Nicholas's attention. The investigation continues. With Nicholas Pacello in the spotlight, the investigation took a new direction. Authorities sought evidence linking him to the crime, including DNA analysis and testimony from neighbors. However, the case remained shrouded in uncertainty. The combination of destroyed evidence, conflicting accounts, and the peculiar circumstances of the crime scene made it one of the most enigmatic murder cases in Argentina's history. A calculated crime or a misguided theory? On the fateful Sunday, investigators theorized that Nicholas, believing the homeowners would be out until evening, decided to break in and steal the safe. The plan went awry when Maria Marta returned home earlier than expected due to the rain. Surprised, Pacello reportedly panicked, leading to the confrontation that ended in Maria Marta's death. The perfect escape. Nicholas's familiarity with the Carmel complex's layout, including the locations of all security cameras, allegedly allowed him to avoid detection while escaping with the safe. However, despite the compelling narrative, evidence to support his involvement was lacking. Pacello's alibi. Nicholas denied all accusations, claiming he had spent most of the day with his mother, who corroborated his alibi. Tragedy struck weeks before the trial when his mother died by suicide, leaving behind a note expressing her love for her son and bequeathing all her possessions to him. DNA evidence. Investigators took DNA samples from everyone at the scene, including Nicholas. Residents of the Carmel complex, eager to clear their names, volunteered samples as well. To everyone's astonishment, the blood found under Maria Marta's nails did not match Nicholas or any suspect. Moreover, no traces of his DNA were found in the victim's home, leaving no physical evidence to connect him to the crime. A mysterious end. Despite the lack of evidence tying Nicholas to Maria Marta's death, he was later imprisoned for unrelated crimes, including a series of burglaries and fraud. However, the missing safe and the weapon used in the crime have never been recovered, leaving the case unsolved. The case today. To this day, Nicholas Pacella remains under investigation for his possible involvement in Maria Marta's death, but the lack of concrete evidence prevents closure. The case of the Argentine socialite's murder remains one of the most puzzling and controversial in the nation's history. A lingering question. As we reflect on this case, it is impossible not to wonder, was the true perpetrator among those initially suspected? Or has the real culprit evaded justice entirely? Until definitive answers are found, Maria Marta Garcia Belson's tragic story remains an enduring mystery. Story 4. In 2022, a young man named Bryce Brawl disappeared under strange circumstances, leaving only scattered clues and many unanswered questions. His girlfriend Cordelia's family was puzzled by what had happened, and her father, Michael Ilix, seemed to know more than he let on. What started as a routine missing persons case quickly turned into a chilling tale of lies, revenge, and desperation. What really happened that fateful day? How deep does this mystery run? Stay with us as we uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deceit and suspicion. It was a cold day in a small Minnesota town, with mist blanketing the streets and a damp chill in the air. The usually quiet town of Center felt even more desolate. This was the last place Bryce was seen, leaving home to visit a storage unit with Cordelia's father, Michael. Cordelia had just returned to Minnesota after months of traveling across the country, hoping for a warm welcome and some peace. Instead, she found herself entangled in a series of unsettling events. Shortly after her return, she sensed something was off. Bryce had gone with her father to drop off some belongings at a storage unit, just a short walk from their home. The trip should have only taken 30 minutes, but as the hours passed, Bryce didn't come back. Cordelia's unease grew. She tried to distract herself by settling in and taking a shower, but the anxiety wouldn't fade. Later that day, Michael returned alone. He looked shaken and told Cordelia that Bryce had been taken at the storage facility. Michael explained that 2 dark gray cars had pulled up while they were there. People who seemed like officials got out, but they didn't show any identification or introduce themselves. According to Michael, everything happened so quickly that he couldn't ask questions or figure out what was going on. The strangers restrained Bryce, handcuffed him, and drove off. The cars were plain and unmarked, their headlights cutting through the evening gloom, leaving more questions than answers. The fog clouded Michael's memory, and he couldn't recall any details that might help identify who or what he had seen. His vague words left Cordelia shocked. Desperate for answers, she immediately tried calling Bryce, but his phone was off. She sent him messages, begging him to come back and explain what had happened, but he never replied. As each minute passed, Cordelia's worry grew stronger. By Friday, October 28th, after several days without any news, she went to the Crowan County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. She didn't have much information to give the authorities except for Michael's confusing account. The police wasted no time and launched an investigation. Detectives reviewed all the messages Cordelia had sent Bryce on the night he disappeared. Her panic was clear in the texts, with each message showing her growing fear. Her distress seemed to strike a chord with the investigators. What started as a standard missing persons case quickly became something much darker and more complicated. Officers questioned Michael Ilix, but his statements were inconsistent and left too many unanswered questions. This led to further interviews with him. Meanwhile, investigators visited the storage facility where Bryce was last seen. What they found there only made the situation more mysterious. There were drag marks, like something heavy had been moved, and other pieces of evidence that added a sinister feel to the story. The deeper the police dug into the case, the more unsettling the details became. Bryce Burrell's disappearance wasn't just a simple case anymore. It had turned into a troubling enigma filled with fear and uncertainty. Cordelia, who initially trusted her father's story, started to doubt him as everything around her became increasingly strange and incomprehensible. Michael Elix knew he would be the first person the police would question after Cordelia reported Bryce missing. He tried to mentally prepare himself for the inevitable. That Friday, October 28th, officers tracked Michael down at a family Halloween party in Brainerd. He agreed to return with them to the storage facility and provide a more detailed explanation of what had happened on the day Bryce vanished. Despite this, the story only grew more complex. Each new detail uncovered by the police seemed to raise even more questions. The truth felt increasingly out of reach. Michael recounted the events, trying to include every detail. He explained that he and Bryce had arrived at the storage unit in a white Ford Escape with a trailer to go through some belongings after the long road trip he and Cordelia had recently taken. The task took about 45 minutes, with Bryce sorting through his items to decide what to keep and what to throw away. Around 5:45 p.m., they were getting ready to leave when something unexpected happened. As they started pulling out of the storage unit, two dark gray vehicles blocked their path. Michael described the cars as having flashing lights, but not the kind used by regular patrol cars. Instead, they looked like the lights often seen on unmarked law enforcement vehicles. This immediately made Michael suspicious and questioned if the people inside were legitimate authorities. According to Michael, both he and Bryce were briefly detained by these unidentified individuals. Michael was taken back to his white Ford Escape, while Bryce was placed in a different vehicle, a dark gray SUV. Michael remembered the COV's interior as plain, except for a small computer mounted on the dashboard. During the encounter, Michael said it seemed highly organized, involving several people. Bryce appeared to understand that this wasn't a random situation. Before they were separated, Bryce thanked Michael for his help but didn't say anything else. Earlier that day, on the drive to the storage unit, the two men had barely spoken. When Michael asked Bryce about the road trip he and Cordelia had taken, Bryce had replied briefly, saying the drive was fine. Both men remained quiet and distant, showing little interest in starting a conversation. As detectives continued their investigation, they uncovered hints of tension within the family. Michael admitted that he felt uneasy around Bryce and was hesitant to spend time with him. This raised questions about why Michael had agreed to help Bryce with the storage unit in the first place, especially without Cordelia being there. Cordelia later explained that she had stayed home that day because she was too exhausted from the long road trip and needed to rest. From Michael's perspective, the trip to the storage unit had been routine until it was interrupted by the strange and unsettling encounter. He speculated that the events might be tied to some kind of trouble Bryce had gotten himself into, especially since Bryce had just returned to town after a lengthy road trip across the United States. Michael wasn't convinced. The mention of Arizona nagged at him. It was too specific to ignore. He pressed Cordelia further, asking why Bryce would be connected to Arizona or why it was relevant to his sudden disappearance. Cordelia hesitated, her eyes darting away as she stammered that it was nothing, just a passing mention. But Michael noticed the tremor in her voice and the way her hands fidgeted nervously. "You're hiding something," Michael said gently but firmly. "Cordelia, if you know anything about this, you have to tell me. This isn't just about Bryce, it could be about your safety too." Cordelia froze for a moment before lowering her gaze. "It's complicated," she muttered. Michael's patience was wearing thin, but he resisted the urge to raise his voice. "I don't care how complicated it is. Tell me what's going on." Finally, Cordelia relented. "There was someone we met on the road in Arizona, Bryce got involved." She began hesitantly. Involved in what Michael asked, his heart sinking as he prepared for the worst. She shook her head. "I don't know everything, Dad. It was just supposed to be a simple deal. Some guy approached Bryce when we were at a diner, said he needed someone to deliver a package. Bryce thought it would be easy money. We were running low on cash and I didn't think it was a big deal." Michael felt his stomach twist. "What kind of package?" Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me and Bryce wouldn't let me see it. He just said it wasn't a big deal, that we'd drop it off and be done with it. But after that, things started happening. People started following us, leaving notes on the car. Bryce said he could handle it, but I was scared, Dad. I wanted to come home, but he insisted we finish the trip." Michael's mind raced. And when you came home early, was it because of this? Cordelia nodded slowly. Something happened. Bryce didn't tell me everything, but he said we had to leave right away. He looked terrified. Michael's instincts told him they were in over their heads. If Bryce had gotten tangled up in something illegal, it could explain his disappearance. But there was still so much Cordelia wasn't saying or didn't know. Did you ever see the man again? The one who gave Bryce the package? Cordelia shook her head. No, but Bryce got a call from someone after we got home. I don't know who it was, but after that he started acting even stranger. Michael exhaled, his mind piecing together fragments of a puzzle that still didn't make sense. Whoever Bryce had gotten involved with, it wasn't over. Okay, Michael said, trying to steady his voice. We're gonna figure this out. But you have to tell me everything, Cordelia. No more hiding things, no matter how bad they seem. Cordelia nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. As Michael embraced his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing at the edge of something far darker than they had imagined. And for Bryce, wherever he was, time might be running out. Michael's mind raced as he processed Cordelia's revelation. Washington, what were you doing there? Cordelia hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. Bryce wanted to meet someone there, she said. He said it was important, something about tying up loose ends. I didn't ask too many questions because, well, he wasn't in the mood to explain. Do you remember where in Washington, who he was meeting? Michael pressed, his voice tight with concern. I don't know exactly, Cordelia admitted. It was somewhere near Seattle. The guy seemed off. Bryce called him Jack, but I don't think that was his real name. Michael leaned forward, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Did you meet this Jack? What did he want? Cordelia nodded reluctantly. I saw him once. He was older, maybe in his late 40s or 50s. He gave Bryce something, a small package. Bryce told me to wait in the car while they talked. He didn't want me involved. Did Bryce ever tell you what was in the package? Michael asked. No, Cordelia said, her voice trembling. But after that meeting, Bryce started acting even more paranoid. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder, and talking about people following us. Michael's heart sank. Whatever Bryce had gotten involved in, it was serious. He realized that his daughter might be in more danger than she realized. Did Bryce ever say why he was so worried? Or what these people wanted? Cordelia shook her head. Not really. He just said that we needed to lay low and stay out of sight for a while. Michael stood up and began pacing the room. Cordelia, this is bigger than just Bryce disappearing. If he was involved with dangerous people, they might come after you too. We need to go to the police and tell them everything you know. Cordelia's eyes widened in fear. No, we can't do that, Dad. Bryce said they would kill us if we talked to anyone. Michael stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He knelt in front of his daughter, gripping her shoulders gently. Listen to me, Cordelia. Keeping quiet isn't going to protect you. If these people are as dangerous as Bryce thought, they won't stop just because you're silent. We need help. Cordelia hesitated, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, Dad. I don't know what to do. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace. We'll figure this out together. But I need you to trust me. Okay? We'll find a way to keep you safe. As he held his daughter, Michael resolved to get to the bottom of the mystery, no matter the cost. Bryce's disappearance was just the beginning. Whatever secrets had been buried during their travels, Michael was determined to uncover them before it was too late. The tension was palpable as the investigation progressed. Michael, though cooperative, found himself increasingly under scrutiny. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies in his timeline, which only added to the air of suspicion surrounding the case. Cordelia, for her part, seemed trapped in a web of fear and loyalty. She admitted to the controlling nature of her relationship with Bryce, but still appeared reluctant to speak ill of him outright. Her hesitance frustrated both her father and the authorities. I don't understand, Michael confided to the lead detective one evening. I just want to help my daughter, but she's hiding something. Bryce's disappearance feels like a piece of a much larger puzzle. The detective nodded. That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Howard. But we need complete transparency from everyone involved. A new development. Just when it seemed the case had stalled, the police received a tip from a motel owner in Flagstaff, Arizona. The owner recognized Bryce and Cordelia from a photo circulated by investigators. He claimed they had stayed there for 3 nights about 2 weeks prior to Bryce's disappearance. The motel records confirmed that they had checked in under fake names and paid in cash. Surveillance footage showed Bryce frequently leaving their room late at night, sometimes returning with small packages. When confronted with this information, Cordelia broke down. Bryce was in trouble, she admitted tearfully. He owed money to people, dangerous people. That's why we were in Arizona. He said he needed to settle a debt. Debt? For what, Michael asked, his voice trembling. I don't know exactly, Cordelia replied, but he was desperate. He said if he didn't pay, they'd come after us. The revelation sent chills through Michael. It confirmed his worst fears that Bryce's disappearance was tied to something criminal. The missing phones. Investigators focused on tracking down Bryce's and Cordelia's phones, hoping they held vital information. After days of searching, they located one of Bryce's smartphones at a pawn shop in Flagstaff. The device had been wiped clean, but forensic experts managed to recover fragments of data. Among the recovered messages was an exchange with a contact saved as J. The messages were cryptic, but hinted at a deal gone wrong. Phrases like running out of time and they want more than we agreed painted a grim picture. The storage unit. Attention shifted back to the storage unit where Bryce was last seen. A thorough search revealed a hidden compartment in one of the walls. Inside, police found a burner phone and a small stash of cash. The burner phone contained a single unsent message. I'm out. Can't do this anymore. If you come near her, I'll make sure everyone knows. The message was time-stamped just hours before Bryce's disappearance. The unraveling. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, a troubling narrative emerged. Bryce appeared to be entangled in a smuggling operation, likely involving drugs or illegal goods. His sudden disappearance suggested he had either tried to back out of the arrangement or had been silenced. Cordelia, despite her loyalty to Bryce, seemed to be an unwitting accomplice. Her fear and evasiveness made sense in light of the danger they were in. Michael, meanwhile, remained determined to protect his daughter. But as he reflected on the events leading up to Bryce's disappearance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still missing from the story. The deeper the investigation went, the more it revealed the tangled history between the Elix family and the tragic events surrounding Bryce and Cordelia. As authorities unraveled more details, it became clear that the relationship between father and situation, family dynamics and tensions, Michael's tight control over Cordelia's life was a growing point of concern. His mistrust of her choices, and especially his dislike for Bryce, painted a clearer picture of why Cordelia had been so eager to escape on her cross-country trip. While it had initially seemed like an innocent adventure, it was clear that the road trip served as an escape from the mounting pressures and tension at home. Cordelia's family dynamics were complex. Her mother's battle with Huntington's disease, combined with the challenges faced by her younger sibling, had created an already volatile household. But Michael's behavior, specifically his relentless pressure on Cordelia, had pushed her further away. Hiring a private investigator to follow her ex-boyfriend was just one example of the lengths Michael went to, showing how deep his mistrust ran. Investigators began to suspect that Michael's influence over his daughter had more to do with the conflict than Cordelia was willing to admit. She had wanted to break free, but in doing so, she had connected herself to Bryce, whose own life was full of uncertainties and struggles. It wasn't until investigators confronted Michael about Bryce's phone that the truth started to come out. Initially, Michael denied any involvement with the phone, claiming he had never handled it. But after further questioning, he admitted that he had taken the phone from the car and disposed of it in a gas station trash bin in Brainerd the same evening Bryce disappeared. His reasoning was that he wanted to protect Cordelia from being tracked by whoever was behind Bryce's disappearance. The admission was a significant moment in the investigation. Michael had gone to great lengths to shield his daughter from what he believed was an even darker situation. But the authorities now wondered, was he protecting her, Or was he concealing something more troubling? Bryce the Dreamer with a hidden life. Bryce Brogel's background also added more layers to the investigation. Born in Brainerd in 1999, Bryce had always been a dreamer. At 23, he had aspirations of building a homestead in Alaska, hoping to live off the land and create a self-sufficient life. His relationship with Cordelia had started in February 2022, and the two had bonded over their shared love for adventure and the outdoors. Their trip across the country had been meant to give them the freedom they longed for, but as the investigation revealed, their relationship wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. While Bryce had envisioned a simple life, free of the constraints of society, he was also entangled in a world of danger and secrecy. His ties to people who could be dangerous were becoming clearer, and it appeared that his disappearance wasn't an accident. It was part of a larger, more sinister story. The search for truth as Michael's actions and the details of Cordelia's life began to surface. It became evident that there were more questions than answers. Was Michael's overbearing control over his daughter a catalyst for her getting involved with Bryce? Or had something darker been happening between them during their travels? Was Bryce's disappearance truly the result of a criminal operation? Or was it an elaborate ruse to disappear under the radar? As Cordelia clung to Bryce despite everything, the true nature of their relationship and the secrets they had been hiding began to emerge. And with each new piece of information, the authorities were no closer to understanding whether Bryce had been taken, or whether he had simply vanished on his own accord. As investigators dug deeper into Michael's past, his history with the law became an unsettling part of the investigation. His previous legal issues raised questions about his behavior and mindset. The revelation that Michael had been convicted of a crime involving a mentally incapacitated adult in 2018 raised doubts about his motivations and his sense of control in sensitive situations. This new information painted a complicated picture of Michael as a man with a troubled past and a tendency to act out of fear or anger. Despite Michael's attempts to explain his actions, his conflicting statements and inconsistencies had investigators questioning whether his motives were purely protective, or whether there was more to his involvement in Bryce's disappearance than he was letting on. Michael's anguish and helplessness were real, but his desire to protect his daughter might have clouded his judgment, leading him to make decisions that only complicated the investigation further. The strained relationship between Cordelia and Bryce was also critical in understanding what had happened. Michael's suspicions about Bryce's controlling behavior were not unfounded. He had witnessed firsthand how Bryce seemed to dominate every aspect of Cordelia's life, from monitoring her phone activity to manipulating her emotions. Michael had seen his daughter become increasingly withdrawn and submissive, which triggered his desire to intervene. However, his intervention, at least as far as investigators were concerned, seemed to have crossed a line between protection and control. As investigators continued to piece together the story, they found themselves questioning not only the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance but also Michael's role in the family's turmoil. His background, his strained relationship with his daughter, and his increasingly erratic actions were beginning to paint a picture of a man who might have had more to do with the situation than he was willing to admit. Cordelia, for her part, remained conflicted and torn. On one hand, she loved Bryce and seemed to feel deeply connected to him, but on the other, she had witnessed the destructive dynamics of their relationship and felt trapped between the man she loved and her protective father. She found herself caught in a web of guilt, fear, and confusion, unsure of who to trust or what actions to take. But the more he spoke, the more his words seemed to raise doubts about his true role in the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance. Michael's repeated insistence on protecting his family and his strong emotions about Bryce's behavior added layers to the investigation. Despite passing the polygraph tests, investigators remained skeptical, knowing that polygraphs were not definitive proof of innocence. Michael's credibility was now under scrutiny, not just because of his personal history, but also because of his contradictory statements and behavior. The tense atmosphere during the interrogations was palpable. Michael's frustration grew as the investigators pressed him for answers, but he held his ground. He argued that while he had been angry with Bryce, his actions had never been meant to harm him. However, his words were sometimes at odds with the actions he had taken. Throwing away Bryce's phone and expressing a desire to scare him off were not the actions of a passive bystander. These inconsistencies painted a picture of someone who might have been acting out of fear, but also out of a desire to control the situation. The fact that Michael had confronted Bryce multiple times about the bruises on Cordelia's face added to the complexity. He claimed that he had warned Bryce that any further harm to his daughter would result in consequences. But was this really an act of protection, or was it driven by something deeper, like a need for control over Cordelia's choices? Investigators were not convinced by Michael's explanations, especially since he kept referring to Bryce in the past tense, as if he had already accepted Bryce's disappearance as a fait accompli. His continued focus on his daughter's relationship with Bryce was not lost on the investigators, who now had to consider whether Michael was involved in a more direct way than he had let on. Michael Ilich's controlling relationship with his daughter Cordelia and his growing mistrust of her boyfriend, Bryce Bogle, set the stage for a tragic and violent crime. Concerned for Cordelia's well-being and fueled by suspicions of abuse, Michael's protective instincts transformed into frustration and anger. This led him to confront Bryce at his storage unit, where an argument turned fatal. Michael shot Bryce in the back of the head, claiming it was an impulsive act to protect his daughter. However, the evidence painted a darker picture. Investigators uncovered forensic evidence and testimony revealing a premeditated plan. Michael had previously threatened Bryce and told others he intended to kill him. A bleach bottle found in the storage unit contained both Bryce's and Michael's DNA, while a sled used to move Bryce's body was discovered with traces of blood. Phone records showed Michael's movements from the storage unit to a remote area near Edward Lake, where Bryce's body was eventually found buried. Despite Michael's claims of acting out of fear for Cordelia's safety, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. Testimonies revealed Michael's long-standing animosity toward Bryce and his belief that killing him was the only way to protect Cordelia, even though she denied any abuse. In April 2024, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case highlights the destructive power of fear, mistrust, and unresolved conflict, which led to the loss of a young man's life and the irreversible fracture of a family. It serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of addressing concerns through understanding and open communication, rather than resorting to violence. Story 5. Imagine going through life thinking you truly know the people closest to you, only to discover they've been hiding a dark secret for 25 years. Family secrets can shape us in ways we don't even realize, sometimes holding us back from true happiness. When the truth finally comes out, it can feel like your entire world is falling apart in an instant. I believe trusting someone's words after so many years is a risky gamble. It's hard to imagine living alongside someone, knowing their dark secrets, and keeping quiet. Were there personal motives involved? Let's dive into this story together. Today we're uncovering a chilling tale of love, betrayal, and a mystery that tangled itself around unsolved crimes in Holland, Michigan. The events were so shocking that every resident had their own theory about what could have happened. It took investigators years to finally bring a suspect to trial, but was justice truly served? Gail Wingarden was born on April 24, 1965, to Wendell and Dorothy Wingarden as the eighth child in a large, close-knit family in Ottawa County, Michigan. Though they didn't have much money, the Wingardens were known for their strong family bonds and the care they showed for each other. They embodied the meaning of a loving and united family. Despite their warmth, financial struggles were common, and from a young age, Gail dreamed of a career that would allow her to afford the things every child wishes for. She saved money and confided in her older sister, Cheryl, that she planned to work hard so she'd never have to go without. As a teenager, Gail got her first job as a waitress. The pay wasn't much, but tips helped her earn decent money. Her warm, friendly, and charming nature meant she left a lasting impression on everyone she met. At 18, Gail experienced her first true love. The relationship moved quickly, and the young couple moved in together, dreaming of building a home and starting a family. They lived together for about a year. In 1984, when Gail was 19, she began a new job where she met a 25-year-old contractor named Rick Brink. For Gail, it was love at first sight. She ended her previous relationship and poured her heart into her new romance with Rick. What unfolded next would shake the foundations of her life and the peaceful town of Holland, Michigan. Rick was so taken by Gail that on the very day they met, he told his mom he had found the woman he wanted to marry. He was head over heels, and their relationship quickly blossomed into something special. They spent their days going on romantic dates and outings, with Rick going above and beyond to make Gail happy. Deeply in love, they seemed like the perfect match, hardworking, ambitious, and full of energy. They shared the same dreams of building a future together, working hard, and one day raising a family in their dream home. One summer, the couple visited Rick's family lake house on Lake Michigan, where he had a boat. Gail tried water skiing, and everyone who saw them together agreed they looked like the perfect couple. On April 25, 1986, just one day before Gail's birthday, they got married in a small church ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Rick's father, Garrett Brink, helped them find the home they had been dreaming of, a charming old house on 20 acres of land on Ransom Street, just outside their hometown of Holland, Michigan. Garrett managed to secure a great deal, and the newlyweds were excited to start renovations. Rick, a skilled handyman who worked for a furniture company and trained carpenters, took on the challenge of transforming the house. By October 1987, they moved into the partially renovated home, documenting their progress on video as they cleaned, painted, tore down walls, and repaired floors. The once dated house was slowly coming back to life. Gail even told her sister that their next project would be a nursery, as they were ready to start a family. On November 21, 1987, Rick and Gail attended the wedding of one of Rick's high school friends. They had a wonderful time, but the next day, something strange happened. Neither of them showed up for work. Rick, who worked for Trenway, a major furniture company, was known for his reliability. His absence was completely out of character. Concerned, Rick's supervisor called their home, but no one answered. Growing worried, he contacted Rick's parents to see if they knew why Rick hadn't come to work. Rick's parents were equally alarmed. They knew their son wouldn't disappear without a word, and fear for the couple's safety began to set in. Something was clearly wrong. Rick's parents, growing more concerned, decided to call Gail's workplace to check on her. They discovered that she hadn't shown up either. Alarmed, they rushed to Rick and Gail's house to see if everything was okay. When they arrived, they immediately noticed Rick's car parked in the driveway. Feeling a glimmer of relief, they hoped the couple was just at home, perhaps unwell or sleeping in. But as they approached the car, they saw something unusual. Rick was inside, sitting in an awkward position. His knees were on the floor beneath the steering wheel, his body hunched over and leaning toward the passenger seat, with his head resting against the passenger side door. Rick's father, Garrett, moved closer and called out his son's name, but there was no response. When Garrett tapped Rick's shoulder, he realized his son was unresponsive, and then he saw the blood on Rick's head. Overcome with horror, Rick's parents didn't enter the house, fearing what else they might find. Instead, they immediately called the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. When deputies arrived, they searched the house. Inside the bedroom, they found Gail. At first glance, it seemed as though she was simply sleeping with a pillow over her face. But when the officers lifted the pillow, they saw it was stained with blood. Gail had been shot 3 times at close range. More officers soon arrived to begin a thorough investigation of the scene. Detectives carefully combed through the house, searching for clues or evidence that might point to what had happened. The initial theory was that Rick might have harmed Gail and then, overcome with guilt, taken his own life. But this idea quickly fell apart when they searched Rick's car. There was no weapon to be found, nor was there any evidence linking him to an attack on his wife. In a single day, the couple's storybook romance filled with dreams of a bright future had ended in unimaginable tragedy. Both Rick and Gail were gone. Their love story transformed into a nightmare. Yet, there was no clear motive, no suspect, and no explanation for the violence that had shattered their lives. The investigation pressed on, and the weapon used in the crime was identified as a .22 caliber revolver. Rick had sustained fatal injuries from 2 close-range gunshots to the head. Investigators also found a bullet hole in the passenger side window of Rick's car, which was shattered. The driver's side window was partially rolled down, leading authorities to believe that Rick had willingly lowered it to speak with someone he likely knew and trusted, as there were no immediate signs of danger. Inside the house, there were no signs of a robbery or forced entry. The door was intact, and the house remained undisturbed. Nothing was stolen or ransacked. Rick and Gail's wallets were on the kitchen table, untouched, with cash and credit cards inside. Their wedding rings were still on their fingers, and scattered jewelry in the house was left untouched. The lack of shell casings and the fact that the bullets remained lodged in the victims suggested that the perpetrator had come with a singular purpose to take their lives. The physical evidence was sparse. 6 fingerprints were found in the house. 4 belonged to Rick and Gail, while the remaining 2 couldn't be matched to any known records in law enforcement databases. Investigators determined that the murders occurred in the early hours of November 22nd, just hours after Rick and Gail were last seen leaving a wedding reception at around 11 p.m. on November 21st. Despite the scarcity of physical evidence, rumors and speculation swirled throughout the community. However, not everyone with suspicions was forthcoming, and investigators found it challenging to gather actionable leads. No arrests were made, and no suspects were identified. To trace the couple's final hours, detectives began questioning friends, family, and co-workers. One of the first people they spoke with was Gail's brother, Ryan Wingarden. He revealed that Gail's ex-boyfriend had confronted her publicly, professing that he still loved her and was jealous of her relationship with Rick. According to Ryan, the ex-boyfriend had even tried to persuade Gail to leave Rick and return to him. This revelation added a layer of intrigue to the case, but without concrete evidence, it remained a lead that investigators couldn't immediately act on. The mystery deepened as the town of Holland, Michigan, continued to reel from the shocking tragedy. Gail was happily married, and despite the ex-boyfriend's feelings, she had moved on. Police tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement, willingly took a polygraph test which he passed and provided a solid alibi. With no evidence linking him to the crime, authorities ruled him out as a suspect. A few days into the investigation, another lead surfaced. The previous owner of Rick and Gail's came forward with an intriguing theory. He suggested that the crime might have been a case of mistaken identity, that the perpetrator could have been targeting him instead, unaware he no longer lived there. This former owner, known by the nickname Shotgun, had a complicated past. He was once affiliated with a motorcycle club and had been involved in trafficking banned substances and weapons. However, Shotgun had turned informant, working with federal agents after he opposed the sale of illegal substances to teenagers. He provided information on criminal activities within certain groups. Detectives pursued this lead thoroughly. They interviewed other informants, questioned members of motorcycle clubs in Detroit, and tried to connect the dots. Despite their efforts, no evidence emerged linking these groups to the double homicide of Gail and Rick. After about a month, this theory was dismissed due to a lack of substantial proof. Then, on Christmas Eve, a shocking new development occurred. Another violent crime was reported near the Brinks home. Deborah Wilson, a local woman, was found dead in her backyard, having suffered a fatal neck injury. Investigators soon discovered that Deborah and Gail had attended the same high school, were in the same graduating class, and shared overlapping social circles. This chilling coincidence raised immediate suspicions that the two crimes might be connected. The small town of Holland, Michigan, was gripped by fear. Residents were on edge, speculating whether the same perpetrator could be responsible and wondering if more victims would follow. The senselessness of the crimes cast a shadow over the once peaceful community, leaving everyone on high alert. That Gail's brother, Ryan Wingarden, had behaved strangely after the murders. Cheryl and her aunt revealed that Ryan seemed unusually nervous and avoided discussing the tragedy altogether. Over the years, his evasive behavior had raised suspicions within the family. Detectives decided to take a closer look at Ryan. They began questioning other family members and acquaintances who had interacted with him around the time of the murders. Several noted that Ryan's demeanor had changed drastically after Gail and Rick's deaths. Some described him as withdrawn and secretive, while others mentioned moments where he seemed overly defensive when the topic of the murders came up. The detectives found it curious that Ryan had never been formally interrogated during the original investigation. To better understand his potential involvement, they started piecing together his movements and behavior from that time. Through their interviews, the detectives learned of an incident where Ryan reportedly confided in someone close to him. He had allegedly shared chilling details about the murders, details that were never made public. This revelation gave detectives enough cause to bring Ryan in for questioning. In early 2013, investigators approached Ryan Weingarten and asked him to recount his version of events from November 1987. Ryan's story was vague, inconsistent, and riddled with contradictions. When confronted with evidence and witness statements, Ryan began to falter. Detectives then focused on building a psychological profile and gathering corroborating evidence. They uncovered allegations that Ryan had a strained relationship with Gail, stemming from unresolved jealousy and resentment. Some family members even suggested that Ryan had been possessive and controlling toward his younger sister. After months of interviews and analysis, the detectives believed they had enough evidence to proceed. In early 2014, Ryan Weingarten was arrested and charged with the murders of Rick and Gail Brink. The case that had remained cold for 25 years was finally brought to trial. Prosecutors argued that Ryan had acted out of jealousy and anger, unable to accept Gail's happiness and her life with Rick. The defense, on the other hand, claimed there was no physical evidence tying Ryan to the crime scene. The trial brought the family's long-buried pain to the surface, as dark secrets were exposed and relationships were tested. It was a shocking and emotional journey for everyone involved. During the January 15th interview, Pam's account shifted in a startling way. She began to unravel under the pressure of questioning and confessed that Ryan had told her he was involved in the murders of Rick and Gail Brink. According to Pam, Ryan confided in her shortly after the crime but swore her to secrecy, saying they needed to protect each other and their future. Pam described how Ryan had admitted to shooting both Gail and Rick. She explained that he had been angry and jealous, feelings that had festered for years. Ryan was particularly resentful of Gail's seemingly happy and successful life with Rick, and the argument over their parents' camper had been the breaking point. Investigators were stunned by Pam's confession but knew they needed more evidence to solidify their case. They pressed her for further details, and she revealed chilling specifics about the murder's details that were never publicly disclosed. Pam said Ryan described how he waited for Rick and Gail to return home from the wedding, ambushing them when they least expected it. Detectives also revisited forensic evidence from the crime scene. Though technology had advanced significantly since 1987, the limited physical evidence available did not directly implicate Ryan. Still, Pam's confession was enough to push the investigation forward. On January 29, 2013, Ryan Weingarten was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The case against him relied heavily on Pam's testimony and the pattern of suspicious behavior he had exhibited over the years. The trial began later that year and drew widespread attention, especially in Holland, Michigan, where the community had long sought closure. Prosecutors argued that Ryan's jealousy, anger, and inability to control his emotions led him to commit the murders. They highlighted Pam's testimony, framing it as the key to unlocking a decades-old mystery. Ryan's defense team attempted to discredit Pam, suggesting her testimony was coerced and that her changing stories made her unreliable. They also pointed to the lack of physical evidence tying Ryan directly to the crime scene. In March 2014, after weeks of emotional testimony and deliberation, the jury found Ryan Weingarten guilty of the murders of Rick and Gail Brink. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a long-awaited sense of justice to the families and the community. Though justice was served, the case left behind a trail of heartbreak, revealing the devastating impact of jealousy, unresolved anger, and hidden secrets within a family. During Ryan's trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy, anger, and unresolved family issues. They argued that Ryan's deep resentment toward Gail, combined with fears that she might reveal their disturbing past, led him to murder his sister and her husband in cold blood. Pam's testimony was central to the case, as it provided chilling details about the events surrounding the crime. Pam recounted how Ryan had admitted to the murders and even brought her to the scene the day after the crime, where she saw the bodies of Rick and Gail. She also testified about the years of threats and emotional manipulation she endured, which kept her from coming forward earlier. The prosecution highlighted her fear in Ryan's to control her as evidence of his violent and coercive nature. Other witnesses, including Ryan's aunt and sister Cheryl, testified about his strange behavior and incriminating comments over the years. Cheryl recalled instances when Ryan had made unsettling remarks about the crime, including wondering aloud if he could have been responsible. The prosecution argued that these statements demonstrated Ryan's guilt and inability to fully conceal his involvement. Ryan's defense team attempted to counter these accusations by discrediting Pam's testimony. They argued that her changing story and years of silence made her unreliable. They also claimed that the lack of physical evidence directly tying Ryan to the crime scene created reasonable doubt. However, the prosecution emphasized that Pam's detailed confession included information that had never been made public, such as the specific positions of the bodies and other details from the crime scene. This, they argued, lent credibility to her account. Ryan's testimony in his own defense proved to be one of the most shocking moments of the trial. His admission of inappropriate interactions with Gail during their teenage years, described as consensual curiosity, horrified many in the courtroom. The prosecution seized on this testimony to argue that Ryan's complicated and toxic relationship with Gail played a role in his motivation for the murders. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Ryan Wingarden guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing an end to a case that had haunted the community for decades. The trial not only provided justice for Rick and Gail Brink, but also unearthed long-buried family secrets, leaving those who knew the Wingarden family reeling. For many, the verdict offered a sense of closure, but the revelations about the dark and twisted dynamics within the family ensured that the legacy of the case would not soon be forgotten. The defense also sought to discredit Pam's testimony, suggesting that her decision to come forward after so many years was motivated by personal issues or ulterior motives. They questioned why she had kept silent for over 2 decades and argued that her delayed confession cast doubt on her credibility. By focusing on the lack of physical evidence linking Ryan to the crime, they attempted to portray him as a victim of false accusations and family drama rather than a cold-blooded murderer. Despite these defense arguments, the prosecution's case remained compelling. They emphasized Ryan's suspicious behavior in the days following the crime, particularly his early knowledge of the murders before they were publicly discovered. Jim Mayim's testimony about Ryan mentioning the deaths of Rick and Gail before their bodies were found was a critical moment that left a strong impression on the jury. The prosecution argued that this knowledge could only have come from the person responsible for the crime. As the trial progressed, the jury considered both sides of the case. They deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching a unanimous verdict guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink. This swift decision was a testament to the strength of the prosecution's case and the impact of Pam's testimony. In the aftermath of the verdict, the Brink family and the community experienced a mix of relief and sadness. While justice had been served, the revelation of Ryan's involvement in the murders left many in shock, particularly those who had known him for years. The trial had unearthed deeply troubling family secrets, and the fact that Ryan had been able to hide his dark actions for so long added a layer of disbelief to the case. Ryan's sentencing followed shortly after the 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, condemning him for the cruelty of his actions. In his statement, the judge called the crime cold-blooded and expressed the deep harm caused to the victims and their families. Despite his conviction, Ryan continued to maintain his innocence, refusing to accept responsibility for the deaths of his sister and her husband. His refusal to admit guilt further alienated his family, who had hoped for a sense of closure after years of uncertainty. As the years passed, the case became a chilling reminder of the secrets that can fester within families and how those secrets can lead to devastating consequences. The investigation and trial revealed the dark and disturbing truths behind the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink, offering some measure of justice but also leaving a lasting scar on everyone involved. Pam's testimony played a central role in the case, but the defense focused on undermining her credibility, especially due to the 25 years that had passed before she came forward with her confession. The defense argued that her statements were the result of pressure or manipulation by the police and that the lack of physical evidence, such as the murder weapon or any fingerprints, meant the case against Ryan was based solely on speculation. Despite these challenges, the prosecution countered that the nature of the crime, personal and brutal, pointed to Ryan as the perpetrator. The fact that both victims had been shot in the head at close range suggested an intimate knowledge of the victims, something that would not be typical in a random attack. Moreover, the early knowledge Ryan displayed about the crime, particularly mentioning the deaths before the bodies were discovered, provided additional circumstantial evidence that tied him to the murders. The case was complicated by the passage of time. It's difficult for juries to make decisions based on decades-old evidence, and the lack of forensic evidence left gaps in the narrative. But ultimately, the jury convicted Ryan, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2015, Ryan's legal team filed an appeal attempting to have his conviction overturned or to secure a new trial. They argued that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on Pam's testimony and that the jury had not been given access to her earlier police interviews, where they believed she had been influenced by investigators. The defense maintained that the only evidence against Ryan was her word and that without it, there would have been no case. However, the court upheld the conviction, citing the compelling nature of the circumstantial evidence, especially the timeline in Ryan's behavior before the bodies were discovered. The jury's decision was not solely based on motive, but also on the totality of the evidence which, even if circumstantial, painted a clear picture of Ryan's guilt. As of now, Ryan remains in prison, maintaining his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The case is a reminder of the complex dynamics within families, the dark secrets that can be hidden for years, and the difficulty of bringing long unsolved crimes to justice. While the families of Rick and Gail Brink may never fully understand why this tragedy occurred, the conviction provided them with a sense of closure, and the legal system ultimately fulfilled its role in holding Ryan Weingarten accountable for his actions. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.